Hello everyone, welcome back to D Squared Stories, an audio fiction podcast bringing you short serialized weekly stories. We are continuing on with our next chapter of Canaveral Academy for Challenged Youth. Without any further ado, let's get into a quick recap and then get started. Last time, the zealous Mr. Simon rained down on the campus like a firestorm. Within days of being there, he caused massive chaos, arbitrarily punishing the girls, disrupting the schedules of everyone. While he caused his mayhem, Mary and Peter both reflected on their pasts that led them to Canaveral Academy. Mr. Simon and Miss Jamie uncovered that Mary had miscarried a child that she had started at Canaveral with. As they attempted to punish her, this roused even Judah, of all people, into acts of rebellion against the school. When Peter descended on the scene, he violently attacked Mr. Simon, before leaving and ordering him to meet him at his office. Chapter 4. Career Day. Sister Teresa waited outside of the headmaster's office, knitting as she sat quietly. She was peacefully and deeply invested in her knitting. She used to say that these times were the moments she felt closest to God, when she could just blissfully create something incredible from the bounty of God's world. Everything else seemed to melt away to her. Some examples of things that were melting included the screaming match that was occurring in the office one door down.
"You assaulted a group of students without cause," Peter yelled. "Each day, time passes and you continue to provide me with no observable progress towards rooting out the killer. You are blessed, beyond what you know, that he or she has not struck again."
"Those girls were ready to crack. They were going to give up their student officer any minute," Mr. Simon said.
"They were not, and even if they were, there is no assurance that it would have meant anything concrete. We could have executed Mary and found additional dead bodies the next day, just to taunt us for our impotence."
Mr. Simon angrily shook his head and repeatedly stomped his foot. He put one hand on his hip and another to scratch his scruffy beard as he looked back at the headmaster. "You put too much stock in this whole student officer deal. It blinds you. It creates a weak spot that lets any of these children forget that they are here because they are awful and terrible sinners." Peter sighed and turned his head up to the wall to face the memorabilia on it. He paused briefly as he stared at the axe bolted to the wall.
"You have always had such a terrible memory," he said. "You were the architect of the student officer idea. You thought it was important to divide the students. You said the only way a lean staff of 10 to 12 adults could possibly manage this many delinquents is if they were pitted against each other, and we had an operative on the inside who would be kept from the harshest punishments."
Mr. Simon seemed to think really hard about this. "Okay, maybe I did. I changed my mind, though. We need to change our minds from time to time."
"No. Fickleness is for children. As adults, we must be certain of what we are doing, and I demand that out of you in your line of work. You have 2 weeks to put together a convincing case for the murders. If you cannot do that, and have it put to a vote to confirm, then you will be out of this academy once more."
Mr. Simon seemed to groan and grit his teeth at this. After a moment of silence, he simply stormed out of the office and into the campus. Peter slowly emerged after him, rolling his eyes. Sister Teresa put her knitting away and walked down with him towards the gym. The two of them went in and saw Judah curling dumbbells. He frantically put them down upon hearing the door open.
"Calm now, Master Judah," Peter said. "Mr. Simon is not here. You are welcome to be exercising once more."
He let out a sigh of relief, but then went over towards Peter. "Headmaster, we must speak about him," he said. "Mr. Simon is completely out of control. He is making an absolute mockery of this school and its staff. The girls, who Miss Mary took so long to get in line, are almost certain to fall back out if there is no difference in punishment for being good or bad."
"Calm again, my young student. Trust in your headmaster to know what he is doing. Trust in God that this is just a test of who can stay good even when the times are tough."
"Tough times can test us, Headmaster. The flood tested Noah, and the desert tested Moses, but those were tests from God, given for a reason. There is no good reason for Mr. Simon to be here."
"Master Judah," Peter said sternly, "do not claim anything is outside of God's control. His ways are mysterious, but always true. In fact, the reason alone might be that no one has died since he arrived to Canaveral."
Judah sighed. The headmaster directed him towards the bench press and put some weight on for him, and instructed him to start doing the reps as he spotted him. Judah breathed in and out as he continued to protest while lifting. Headmaster, surely that is just a coincidence. It was probably an anomaly that these first 2 killings were so close in time. Or perhaps the killer can find no more sins among the faculty to punish. As he continued speaking instead of breathing, he struggled to push the bar back off his chest. Peter had to assist him.
"Oh, trust me, Master Judah," he said. "There is no lack of punishable sins among the remaining faculty."
Judah huffed. Then why are they here? Why are they permitted to inflict such acts of punishment on us? May he who is without sin cast the first stone. Peter put his hands on Judah's shoulders gently and looked him in the eyes.
"Calm, Master Judah," he said. "It is incredibly difficult to hire for this school. Even more difficult to hire for someone who could eventually replace me when I pass on."
Then what do you plan to do about it? Who will you hand off the reins of the school to? Judah's tone grew increasingly frustrated and vicious. This seemed not to faze the headmaster at all, as he continued to hold him still there. He simply made one of his seldomly flashed smiles.
"Well, Master Judah, that is why I am trying to build up your muscle and confidence. I hope one day I can pass on the role of headmaster to you, and you can run Canaveral."
Judah stood there floored. He was completely shocked and speechless for a few moments as he struggled to process what Peter had just said to him. Sister Teresa, who had gone back to her knitting while sitting on a rowing machine, slightly laughed at this. "Wait, I don't understand," Judah said.
"What is there to understand? In but a few months, now, you will be 18. We would cast you out of Canaveral Academy, hoping in what we had done, but ultimately leaving the fate of your soul after this to God. However, I think that would be a waste of your talents. I would much prefer to keep you here, as staff, and I think the recent openings have created a perfect opportunity to do that."
Judah seemed to think very deeply about this. The headmaster was a little puzzled, having hoped that Judah would have been more interested in the idea. The boy, put in this school for a compulsive obsession with his female classmates, and particularly items of their clothing, was the shame of his parents. After 6 successful kids, they could not manage to raise the 7th and final with any level of success. As his grades faltered too, they desired to be rid of him permanently. His father pondered his own jail time, but decided instead to send him somewhere where he could be raised to be the good Christian boy they wanted him to be. However, they made it clear that regardless of how much he improved, they still wanted no part of him. The last letter they had ever written him told him that when he graduated, he was to go get his own job and never associate with them ever again. Headmaster Peter hardly ever let the letters get through to the students, but decided to allow this one as a way to fully break the initially rebellious Judah. It worked too marvelously. Now he had hoped it was the same he needed to convince him that there was nowhere else for him to be aside from Canaveral. Judah breathed for a moment and pressed the barbell once again. "That is quite a lot to think about, Headmaster," he said. "I am honored that you would ever consider me for it. I can't say that's what I imagined for myself after Canaveral, but I will give it thought." Peter walked over to Judah and put his hands on his shoulder.
"Give it thought and prayer, Master Judah," he said. "You need not decide now."
After some more time exercising, Peter and Teresa led Judah to his next class and departed from him. The weather was dark and stormy today. As the children entered their second period, the staff began to set up in the cafeteria for career day. They had this once a year, towards the beginning of the year, to give the students ideas of what to think about for their lives after Canaveral. Old Johnny, the school's maintenance man, ran the booth covering most of the trades: plumbing, mechanic, electrician, all of which he worked on at the school, with varying degrees of success, electrician being the spottiest. Miss Andrea, who looked like her swollen eye beneath her eye patch was making her more tired than usual, ran the healthcare booth. It was presumed most of the students would not go to college, so the booth was mostly catering towards nursing assistant or pharmacy technician and positions of the like. Andrea had the rare distinction of actually having performed one of those jobs that she was speaking to. Peter, as always, ran the booth for higher education, cautioning as always to pick a Christian university and to avoid picking frivolous degrees such as English or theater, unless their goal was to teach them at lower education levels. Normally, jobs in the service industry were handled by Mr. Thad, but seeing as he was no longer with Canaveral, or the Earth, the headmaster simply instructed Mr. Bart to take up the reins. As Peter passed him by, he was given an ugly stare.
"This is some cruel joke you're playing on all of them," Mr. Bart said. "Mr. Bart, you are perfectly capable of speaking to the subject at hand."
Mr. Bart just shook his head, looking like he had something more to say. Peter walked past him and continued over to Miss Andrea. He raised his eyebrow.
"Miss Andrea, where is Miss Jamie?" he asked her.
She seemed to be in a haze for a moment. Then she turned her attention towards Peter, blinking before answering. "Oh, her?" she said, looking in thought. "She's with Mr. Tom and the students. I came over with Johnny and Bart." Peter twitched a little.
"That wasn't the assigned pairings."
Miss Andrea took a moment longer to process this than normal. Then she scowled. "Well, she hates being around me. She's been mostly with Mr. Simon anyway. Those two are peas in a pod."
"Miss Andrea, are you—"
Before Peter could finish his question, Miss Jamie burst through the door alongside Mr. Tom and Mr. Simon. The students followed closely behind them, and Peter returned to his booth. The newer students were ushered around to each booth. The older ones, who had seen this all before, mostly lingered around the tables, chatting with one another. Mary stopped over to Sister Teresa's booth, which was dedicated to the religious vocations, to talk to her. Judah joined her, but only on account of it being the furthest away from Mr. Simon. After only some minutes of this fair, the lights suddenly went out. Reflexively, both Johnny and Peter drew their emergency flashlights and spared no moment in fanning them throughout the cafeteria to avoid anyone exploiting this chaos to run away. The students murmured and whispered amongst themselves, some of them startling as the thunder clapped in the distance.
"Calm, students," Peter said. "The storm must have cut the power to the campus. Everything is all right. There is no need to fear."
"If that's so, why can I see the lights on in the other buildings?" Mr. Bart asked. Out by the window, in the darkness of the stormy weather, there were lights left on in the nearby classrooms. These buildings were all fed from the same transformer, meaning something else must have caused the power to go out. Old Johnny scratched his chin. "Let me go take a look. Probably a fuse blew for no damn reason." He went to go step towards the door to go outside, when in a sudden flurry, Mr. Simon charged in front of the door. This caused the otherwise grizzled and fearless veteran to stumble backwards for a moment out of fright.
"This is a trap! Can't you see?" Mr. Simon asked. "The saboteur, the killer, is trying to lure you outside to kill you!"
A couple of the girls screamed. Mr. Phillip, who had only just pulled out his flashlight, shook with it in his hand as the thought was raised. Peter slammed his fist into the table.
"There is no trap. Everyone remain calm," he said.
He quickly continued to move his light back and forth over the students in the cafeteria, ensuring that every one of them was accounted for. Once satisfied, he spoke again.
"Mr. Johnny will go out and replace the fuse and get everything back up and running." No, he won't. He's just going to get stabbed out there, or the panel will be rigged to electrocute him. I can tell this is the work of the killer. I just know it."
Peter growled, intending to do so under his breath, but it came out much louder. He scanned his flashlight around again. Students and faculty alike looked on in terror at the paranoia that Mr. Simon ushered into the room. Judah, in particular, looked very concerned as the light flashed over his face. Peter breathed deeply, stared back at his old friend, and said,
"Mr. Johnny will go and replace the fuse. This is not a negotiation. I will not live in a house of fear."
On this cue, old Johnny pushed past Mr. Simon with ease, nearly knocking him to the ground in the process. He proceeded outside and towards the electrical panel, only accessible by a door to the utility closet on the outside. Mr. Simon dusted himself off and cackled maniacally as he stared back at Peter.
"Old chap," he said. "I would have never guessed. Though, I guess it makes sense. Bring in an outside investigator, and then no one would ever think to investigate you." "What are you insinuating, Mr. Simon?" "Oh, I'm just saying if he dies, you really pushed him to go out there. I think now might be a good time to say something before things look real suspicious for you, Pete."
Peter ignored him, still continuing to focus on making sure that the students were all accounted for. Mr. Simon seemed to grow more agitated by this. He drew his own flashlight and shined it on Mary.
"Or is that fine because your golden child who rigged the trap will be okay? Is that it?"
he asked. Mary startled at this. Judah grabbed her by the hand reassuringly. She almost seemed to look on at this with more surprise than the accusation. Mr. Simon beckoned her over with his hand. "Come now, girl. Come over here. Let Miss Jamie pat you down for your weapon." She pulled free of Judah's hand, walking behind each of the booths, taking the longest possible way she could to delay getting to him. Her pace was erratic and nervous as she stepped along the cafeteria floor. Eventually, she got to him. Miss Jamie came over and patted her down, searching for anything they could find on her, being gleefully rough in the process. After a few painstaking moments of searching, she let out a huff and pulled away from Mary. "She's clean. Nothing on her, not even a pencil." Mr. Simon stomped his foot. "What? What do you mean? I know she's armed. I know she is. She planned to rig this outage so she could stab her next victim." "Enough," Peter shouted. "How would she have even rigged the electrical outage when she was under your supervision on her way here?" The two stared daggers at each other. The tense silence filled the air for what felt like minutes, before suddenly, all the lights came on. The entire room seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Peter scanned the room, seeing all the students accounted for, as old Johnny re-entered the facility, holding an alarm clock and some string. "It's the darndest thing. Someone strung this clock to this fuse, and when it went off, it pulled the link out with it." Mr. Simon pointed his finger at Peter. "I told you! It was rigged!" Peter did not look back at Mr. Simon. Instead, he stood almost frozen and shaking in fear. Teresa was the first to follow his eyes, and exclaimed, "Oh, heavens! Miss Andrea!" She ran over towards the school nurse, slumped over in her seat. She checked for her pulse, but it had since ceased. Her body had started going cold during the blackout in the room. Peter slowly made his way over towards her. She was drooling, her eyes glazed in an unnatural way. He reached into her pockets, as if searching for something. Eventually, in her front right pocket, he found what he was looking for. Peter let out a sigh for a moment, almost seeming relieved. He pulled the pill bottle from her pocket, the actual label taped over with something else. This seemed not to surprise him in the slightest. However, the jitters returned to his hand when the tape over the label started to peel off. He dropped the bottle out of his hand as the red word, sloth, appeared in all caps on the label underneath, followed by the word, addict. The words were scrawled across the label underneath, which was a prescription for pain medicine for Francis, dated following his brutal beating earlier in the year. Peter's brow twisted and contorted with anger. His vision went blurry and his senses almost numbed for a while. At some point, he felt himself ushered into a conference room with the other staff. The haze of his fury and disbelief had finally started to subside, and after some time, he heard Mr. Matthias speaking. "This is it. This has gone too far. We need the police now." "Not a chance," Mr. Simon said. "We can't go down like this. We can't let them win." "Them?" Mr. Bart yelled. "You don't have the slightest clue who they are. You made life a living hell for the students and faculty alike, and they can still kill right under our noses." "Maybe that's why someone risked it all to take someone out right in front of us," Miss Jamie said. "Sounds an awful like something you would do." They had hardly closed the door, and the students could still hear the screaming match from the outside as they sat at their tables under the supervision of Sister Teresa. Francis was returning from the lavatory in the cafeteria. He walked back to the table slowly. When Sister Teresa looked over towards the girls, he quietly spit on the body of Miss Andrea, still left in the middle of the room. He returned to the boys, all of them shocked by his callousness. "What?" he asked. "You saw the label as well as I did. That bitch was cutting my pain meds and taking some for herself. I bet she was doing that for all of us. Had herself a nice little stash." They all looked on in horror or tried to avert their eyes from him. It took him a moment to read their faces and understand what this meant. "Hey, I wouldn't do that." Javier shot a disapproving glance. "What got you sent to Canaveral again?" Francis's face dropped. He clenched his fist and looked ready to hit the nearly 18-year-old boy. Judah slid over in his seat and grabbed his arm. "Hey, don't," he said. "It would be a bad look right now. They're out for blood. They'll kill anyone if they think it makes them safer." The boys looked on, fully expecting Francis to strike out at Judah for daring to touch him. Francis just breathed in shakily and heavily. He gently pushed Judah's arm away, but said nothing. Judah turned to the other kids. One of the other boys spoke. "Was it Mary? She was the only one who moved at all during that." "The pills were probably laced long before today, dumbass," Javier said. "Yeah, another responded back. I wonder why even cut the power. She probably would have killed over regardless. She was the only one with a background to treat something like that. At the girls' table, they spoke in hushed tones as well. They looked over towards Miss Andrea and listened in to what they could of the raucous discussion in the meeting room. Many fidgeted with their fingers and twirled their hair. They, much like the boys, had been pushed far beyond the usual limits of what they could endure. The abuse they witnessed was giving in to full-on murder, and they could not feel at ease knowing the killer lived amongst them. I got some antidepressants prescribed after Mr. Jim, Rachel said. You did? Rebecca asked. Yeah, I didn't ask for them. She just got me prescribed them. She would give them to me in the morning, right during assembly. Made a point of making sure she never forgot. I always wondered why they didn't do anything. Jesus, Rebecca said. Language. Mary seemed to be zoning out, twirling her hair, but chimed in like a reflex to say that. Are you serious, Mary? Someone just died and you want to give me grief about that. Sister Teresa hates when the Lord's name is taken in vain. It's the only infraction I've ever seen her report. Mary, I don't think infractions are our top concern anymore, Rachel said. Someone here is killing people, and we don't know for how long it will just be teachers. Mary grabbed Rachel by the collar of her uniform. She pulled her in and whispered, voice racked with fear. There is only one person here who we know kills children, and he's on the verge of snapping again. The hushed whispers fell into a complete silence as the faculty all returned from their meeting room. Peter stood amongst the majority of them, who watched on as Miss Jamie and Mr. Simon stood together. The clock was held by Miss Jamie, and the bottle by Mr. Simon. They exchanged some quiet words with each other, but then as they turned right around, the students could just barely make out the last thing Peter said to them. You have until the end of next week. The days continued to come and go, the weather getting slightly less dreary. All the students were on edge with every day, unsure of what the cryptic message from the headmaster to the two most brutal staff members meant. However, as each morning passed, Miss Jamie showed almost a disinterest in disciplining the girls in the morning. Mr. Simon was far less often to be around and looking for excuses to punish them. Mary did not for a moment let her guard down, nor would she let any of her classmates do the same. They did all notice a slight tendency of hers to be up less early than usual in the morning, and provide less help to each of them. No one was sure why this was occurring, but given everything else going on, it seemed far less important in the grand scheme of things. The countdown of the days ticked away, and the students were unsure of whether or not to breathe a sigh of relief on the Friday morning of their last assembly of the week. As they were unsure, Mr. Simon arrived to move all doubt. Peter was in the middle of saying the Lord's Prayer when Mr. Simon charged in and grabbed Mary by the shoulder. Miss Jamie jumped up and down with delight. It's over, brat. I got you once and for all. Mr. Simon. Enough out of you. I can prove that this clock was made by her. He held out a paper bag of the clock, completely deconstructed. He emptied most of its contents onto the floor. He picked up a handful of bobby pins out of the pile and displayed them. These are standard issue uniform pins. A year ago, the girl reported misplacing them, was punished, and was issued new ones. Mr. Bart shook his head. That proves nothing. Every student has lost or damaged pieces of their uniform here and there. Not her, Miss Jamie said. She has never lost anything else. I was so excited at the thought of beating her that I didn't even think to question it. Mr. Bart grimaced. She had given up even the facade that she did not revel in the abuse of the students. Mr. Simon continued. This lines up perfectly with around when the morning infractions came to a stop in the girls' dorm. She was using the clock to wake up before morning call and get all of the girls ready. Mr. Phillips shook his head. We knew this. Miss Jamie has known this for months. If anything, she has more motive for stealing the clock for this purpose. Mr. Simon wagged his finger and smiled with delight. Ah, my dim-witted friend. That would be a reasonable suspicion. So reasonable, in fact, that she actually did do that. Mr. Simon pulled out a second nearly identical clock from the bag. It was a far jankier-looking version than the one that had been used to pull the fuse from the electric box. He displayed it proudly, with a smile on his face. Mary, who had been looking resolute and unshaken throughout all of this, suddenly scowled and tried to pull free of his hand. That's not mine. I didn't make that. Miss Jamie slapped her across the face. Mr. Simon, in anticipation of this, let her go and she was smacked to the ground. Foolish, foolish girl, Mr. Simon said. Once we had taken the first clock, she knew her game had run its course, and she used the second one to send everyone into a tizzy and kill Miss Andrea.
She thought she could get away with pinning it on Miss Jamie. "Mr. Simon," Peter said, "I hope you have more evidence than this."
He nodded his head. "Of course I do, Pete. I got timelines that don't add up and whereabouts during key moments. If I can just ask Miss Mary a few questions, I think we'll all be happy. We'll be in the gym for some interrogation. Feel free to join us to ensure it's up to your standards." He grabbed Mary again by the shoulder and dragged her up to her feet as he and Miss Jamie escorted her to the gym. Peter watched on, with a mix of anxiety and agitation in his expression. He concluded morning prayer, gave brief announcements, and then turned the students over to Mr. Bart and Mr. Phillip to lead them to their first class. He hurried over to the gym. As he did, he heard screaming from within. He frantically pulled at the door handle, but something was jamming it in place. He failed repeatedly to yank it or push it open with his arms. Carefully, using his real leg, he pushed to kick the door in with his fake leg, nearly losing his balance after the first kick barely did anything to the door. He heard additional screaming. This time it sounded like Mary. He firmed his resolve and kicked again, nearly getting one hinge fully loose before falling backwards on his behind. His aging body was slow to get up, but he was driven by sheer anger and determination, and with one more swift kick, he kicked the door in, pushing the weight bench propped against it out of the way. He ran in to see the scene that unfolded before him. Miss Jamie lay on her back on the floor, eyes glazed over, several puncture wounds in her neck and chest. On her forehead was written the word wrath, crudely in blood, but it looked as if the H had been interrupted by something. Mary was held by her wrists by Mr. Simon. He was dripping blood from a gash in his abdomen. She had blood dripping from her hands. In his one hand, he held a pair of sharp scissors and did his best to keep them from her as she struggled to get free. Peter stared on in shock at this scene. Mr. Simon turned his attention over to him. He was heaving heavily and madly. "I went up to your study for just a moment, Pete. When I heard the screams, I came down. She was scrawling in blood on her forehead. She got me good once. What did I tell you, Pete? It's her. It was her all along." Thank you so much for listening to this chapter of Canaveral Academy for Challenged Youth. If you enjoyed, please rate the podcast, give it a like on YouTube, or share with someone else you think might also enjoy. You can stay up to date with Canaveral Academy for Challenged Youth by following us on social media. That will be D Squared Stories on just about any of the major platforms. Thanks again for listening, and I hope to have you listen again next week.